Dr. Bloomer, could you explain what thermogenesis is and why it's important to weight control? And is that what we think of typically as calorie burning?
It is. I mean, thermogenesis essentially is the production of heat energy within the body. So, of course, when we produce heat energy, oftentimes people in the lay press talks about calorie burning or the burning of calories.
And a calorie is a unit of heat, right?
Calorie is a unit of heat energy. That's right. So when individuals consume food particles, all these food particles have to be converted into usable energy, and that's ATP within the body. Some of that energy could be stored, of course, if we don't need it, and some of the energy can be expended or, quote, burned.
And some of us burn, we have more heat, right?
Sure.
And some of us store that as fat, correct?
That's right. So individuals A that consumes 2,000 kilocalories per day versus individual B who consumes that same exact 2,000 kcals per day, same macronutrients, etc. One individual may have a weight that is drastically different than the other, despite the same activity profile, the same age, the same gender or sex, etc. So certainly there are differences in terms of how people metabolize
That's called
food.
metabolism, right? A high metabolism versus a low metabolism.
Right. So sometimes we will have individuals come to our lab, they want an assessment of their metabolic rate, their resting metabolic rate. So we can allow an individual to come to the lab, we can collect gas samples from them over the course of a 30 or 60-minute period, and that'll give us an idea of how many kcals or kilocalories they're expending over that period of time. Then you can extrapolate that over the course of a day. And I'll tell you with certainty that there's a drastic variance in that, even when you have individuals matched on age and on sex, on body size, etc. Individuals will vary. So some of it has to do with, of course, the amount of lean muscle mass that a person has. So you hear often the more muscle you have, the more calories you will expend, and that's true. And that's one of the reasons behind, performance of resistance exercise, with the objective to increase the amount of lean muscle I have so that I could potentially expend more calories throughout the day. And that's true, assuming that a person can train with the sort of effort that is absolutely required to stimulate that increase in muscle. It's not that easy, as all of us know. So you really need to put forth the effort. But that being said, there's a drastic variance within individuals in terms of what their metabolic rate would be. Some individuals can consume 3,000 calories per day, whereas someone else may consume 1,800 calories per day to essentially get the same end result.
That sounds really unfair.
Sure.
Does that not go back to the whole biochemistry from the time we were cave people and we needed to store fat in order to survive?
Well, there's a lot of literature on that, the quote set point theory. Individuals who tend to drop weight and they get to a quote, stalemate or sticking point, they can't lose any weight. They revert back to their normal eating habits and quickly their weight starts to rise back up to their quote set point. People try to gain weight, they try and try, they gain a little weight. When they start getting back to normal, they come right back down to their quote set point. So there's a pretty strong literature on that, and I believe that certainly it has some scientific validity and some weight behind it, that individuals will obviously come back to their quote set point once they revert back to their normal way of doing things. So if you're looking to really make a change, in terms of your physique or in terms of your weight or whatever it may be, then you need to be willing to make a big change in terms of your overall lifestyle and your approach to doing whatever you're doing in terms of exercise, dietary intake, supplementation, etc.
So how do you increase thermogenesis? Does it have anything to do with the kind of calories you take in?
Acutely, when we talk about acute exercise, we know acute exercise, of course, increases energy expenditure during the bout, and it will also increase it to an extent after the bout. We call that excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC for short. So that's both those components, the within exercise energy expenditure and the post-exercise energy expenditure, which is very short-lived, by the way. We're not talking multiple hours, we're talking minutes, okay? Unless someone does muscle damaging exercise, in which case it may be multiple hours, especially for someone that's untrained or deconditioned, because they have such a whopping amount of damage that their body is trying to recover from that trauma. But once a person gets conditioned to that, we're, again, not talking, multiple hours post-exercise. So there is that component with acute exercise, no question about it.
That would increase thermogenesis.
It'll increase energy expenditure, no question about it. Aerobic seems to expend a lot more calories than does resistance exercise, and there are several studies that have shown that, primarily because aerobic is continuous. You get on a bike or a treadmill or go running, and you do it continuously for 30, 40, 60 minutes, whatever it may be. Resistance exercise is intermittent. You do a set, you may rest 1 or 2 or 3 minutes, and then do another set and rest, etc. So the overall, time period that you're performing exercise, while resistance exercise causes different adaptations, which are great, it certainly will not expend the same number of calories. So if someone's main objective was calorie expenditure with exercise, they could care less about muscle strength, muscle hypertrophy. They just wanted to expend energy. Well, aerobic would certainly be the way to go.
Okay, what about the kind of calories we take in? Will that affect thermogenesis?
It will, because we have something known as dietary induced thermogenesis, or the thermic effect of food.
All right.
Okay, so we know that different macronutrients will elicit a different response in terms of the thermic effect of food. Protein has the highest thermic effect of food.
Okay.
Carbohydrate being next, and fat is relatively low, relatively small. So typically, when you hear reports that a high protein diet actually resulted in a significant weight loss above a high carbohydrate or a high fat diet, some of that has to do with the fact that there's a higher thermic effect of food with protein, which again will reinforce the idea that all calories are not the same. A protein calorie versus a carb calorie versus a lipid calorie are not the same. So there's definitely a difference there in terms of the macronutrients consumed. And there's some evidence suggesting that frequent feedings, we call this a nibbling pattern versus the gorging pattern, where people may consume 2 big meals a day versus 6 or 8 small meals per day. There's some evidence that the frequent feeding type pattern acutely may cause, again, an elevation in metabolic rate, because every time you feed, the body has to burn that. But admittedly, I've seen other studies suggesting that that wasn't the case. They've essentially refuted those data. So as always in science, there are, quote, mixed results.
Okay.
Some studies show this, some studies show this, and then we try to make sense out of what's going on.
Okay, are there any other foods that might increase thermogenesis?
There are. I mean, one of the things that there's a lot of different, quote, stimulants, but in terms of food itself, you can look at the, heat-producing properties, for example, of red hot pepper and the capsaicinoids that are involved in that. We do know that if an individual likes to consume that sort of food or hot, spicy food, we do know that that can increase thermogenesis. And that's been shown with whole food in terms of, hot red pepper consumption, as well as with the extracts of the pepper, which can be simply encapsulated. And those are known as capsaicinoids or capsaicin.